The heat clung to the walls of my house like a heavy coat, making even the smallest movement feel like an effort. Summer in this place was always relentless, the kind of warmth that seeped into your bones and made you long for evening breezes and the cool relief of night. I had lived alone for several years, and the quiet had become both a comfort and a burden, a presence that kept me company as much as it isolated me. I filled my days with small rituals, wiping down the kitchen counters, watering my plants in the early morning before the sun grew too intense, folding laundry and lining it up neatly in drawers. It was a rhythm that had settled into my body, something steady in a world that never really stopped changing. Most evenings, I found myself lingering by the window, watching the world fade from golden to dark blue, the sounds of distant cars merging with the hum of cicadas and the soft whir of my aging ceiling fan. The loneliness didn't hurt so much as it dulled the edges of time, letting days slip by without much to mark their passage. I got used to the feeling of being unobserved, unremarkable, as if I were simply part of the house itself, another quiet object collecting dust. When Lynn moved in as my tenant, I didn't expect much to change. She was young, polite, careful with her words, always keeping to herself. I barely noticed her at first, except in the small ways her presence shifted the air, her footsteps in the hallway, the light of her lamp under her door late at night, the faint scent of her lotion that sometimes drifted through the house after she showered. She brought a liveliness into the space, but it was subtle, almost unintentional. I didn't let myself think about her too much. I reminded myself of boundaries, of age and difference, of how life works for people like us, women who have learned to keep themselves small so as not to draw too much attention. Still, there were moments when the stillness in the house felt different with her in it. Sometimes, as I stood in the kitchen and listened to her moving around in her room, I would catch myself holding my breath, waiting for something unnamed. Sometimes at night, the hush of the house would deepen, and I would realize I was listening for the sound of her soft laughter or the gentle rhythm of her music through the thin walls. It was a comfort I didn't want to acknowledge, a gentle reminder that I wasn't entirely alone, no matter how I tried to convince myself otherwise. That evening, the heat seemed to press in from every direction, heavy and unyielding, sticking to my skin and making even the fabric of my dress feel suffocating. I stood in front of the open refrigerator for longer than necessary, letting the cold air hit my face, trying to find relief not just from the temperature but from the restlessness inside me. I knew Lynn was home because I could hear the faint sound of her moving in her room, the squeak of her closet door, the click of her phone on the nightstand. The knowledge of her presence, so close and yet so separate, made my loneliness feel sharper, like a line drawn too deep. I settled into my usual chair near the window, a book in my lap that I had read so many times I barely saw the words anymore. My eyes wandered, not really seeing the street outside, not really focusing on anything at all. I let my mind drift back over the details of the day, the way the sunlight had spilled across the kitchen floor in the morning, the warmth of the water on my skin in the shower, the softness of the sheets I had changed earlier. Every sensation seemed heightened, every memory tinged with the awareness that I was not alone in this house, even if I felt alone inside myself. As the sun dropped lower, the light in the house softened and stretched, turning everything to gold. I listened to the distant sound of Lynn's laughter through her half-open window, mingling with the music she liked to play when she thought no one was listening. I didn't know what the next day would bring, or the one after that, but I knew that tonight, in the thick hush of summer, the quiet in my house was not the same as it had always been. The air was full, charged with something that had no name, and all I could do was sit quietly and let it wrap around me, warm and unfamiliar, as the darkness slowly claimed the day. The day clung to me, the air so thick it felt as though every breath passed through water before filling my lungs. The heat outside had not broken, and inside the house it seemed even denser, as if the walls were holding on to every degree, refusing to let it go. I moved through the hours in slow motion, the ceiling fans doing little to stir the stagnant air, my skin sticky no matter how often I washed my hands or splashed cool water on my wrists. It was the kind of afternoon that blurs the lines between comfort and discomfort, when the mind drifts in and out of daydreams simply for relief. I was in the kitchen preparing something cold to drink when Lynn's presence appeared at the edge of my awareness, subtle but undeniable. I could hear her on the other side of the hallway, a hesitant shuffling of feet, her voice soft and uncertain as she explained that her water heater had finally given up. She asked if she could use my shower, and her request, so innocent and practical, left a ripple in the air long after the words faded. I agreed, of course, and pretended to focus on the ice in my glass as she moved past me, clutching her towel, disappearing behind the bathroom door at the end of the hall. The sound of running water filled the quiet of the house, a steady rhythm that echoed through the rooms and bounced gently off the tile. Steam began to seep from under the bathroom door, curling into the hallway like a delicate veil, and with it came the faintest trace of her fragrance, something clean, a little sweet, almost familiar now after weeks of sharing a home. I tried to keep my attention on the things that grounded me, the cool condensation on my glass, the flicker of the clock's second hand, the way the sunlight slanted across the floor, but it was impossible not to notice the way every sense sharpened. The house was no longer just mine, it was occupied, claimed, held in the hush of her presence. I drifted closer to the hallway, drawn not by intention but by curiosity, and paused near the cracked door. Through the clouded glass, I could just make out her silhouette, blurred and shimmering in the haze of steam. There was something mesmerizing about the outline of her body, soft curves, the arch of her neck as she tilted her head back, the movement of her arms as she washed her hair, the slender line of her back turned in profile. The steam painted her in strokes of silver and gold, the overhead light cutting halos in the mist, making her seem at once close and untouchable. I felt my breath hitch, my heart slow and heavy in my chest, as if the whole house was holding still to watch with me. In those minutes, I saw her not as the quiet girl who left mugs in the sink or played music too late at night, but as a woman in her own right, vivid, unguarded, impossibly alive. I wanted to look away, to grant her privacy, but found myself rooted in place, unable to tear my gaze from the fragile intimacy of the scene. The boundaries between us, so carefully constructed by age and habit and circumstance, seemed to blur in the shimmer of the steam, dissolving into something tender and unsettling. I pressed my palm to the wall, feeling the faint vibrations of the shower behind it, and realized how long it had been since anyone had made me feel this aware, this uncertain, this awake. When she finally stepped out, I caught only a fleeting glimpse, wet hair clinging to her shoulders, skin flushed and glistening, the cotton of her towel barely clinging to her frame. The door closed softly behind her, and the heat and steam drifted down the hall, settling on my skin as if she had brushed past me without ever touching. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, letting the quiet return, but nothing felt quite the same. I was left with the memory of her form in the mist, the echo of water and breath, and a longing I had not expected, sharp and bright, like sunlight breaking through fog. The hours after Lynn's shower felt altered, like the house had shifted on its foundations and nothing sat quite where it used to. I found myself hyper-aware of her movements, the muted thump of her footsteps down the hall, the whisper of her towel against her skin, the brief hush when she slipped into her room to change. I tried to return to my book, to the numbing comfort of routine, but the words danced meaninglessly on the page. The memory of her silhouette in the steam, the glow of her skin, was a presence in the room, lingering and insistent. Evening crept in, painting the walls with the deep blue of dusk. I stood at the window, pretending to watch the sun drop behind the rooftops, but I was only listening, waiting for some sign from the other side of the house, some proof that I was not dreaming all of this. The air felt thick, as if it held a charge that made the hair on my arms stand up, the world suddenly electric and unpredictable. When I heard the soft pad of her bare feet on the hardwood behind me, I did not turn. Instead, I let the silence pull tight around us, the room shrinking with the nearness of her presence. She moved quietly, the faint sound of her breathing making my own feel shallow. I could sense her gaze on me, searching, uncertain. Then, unexpectedly, the heat of her body appeared at my side. I felt the warmth radiating from her skin, her hair still damp and smelling faintly of my soap. She lowered herself to sit beside me, so close that our knees almost brushed. My heart pounded, each beat impossibly loud. I was aware of every inch of my body, how my hands trembled in my lap, how my breathing grew shallow, how my entire being seemed to lean toward her, drawn by an invisible gravity. She reached up and tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering on my cheek a moment too long. The touch was featherlight, yet it sent a rush of heat down my spine, lighting up every nerve beneath my skin. I let myself lean into her palm, let my eyes close for a brief second, surrendering to the simple comfort of being touched. When her lips found mine, I was unprepared for the depth of the feeling that rushed through me, startled by the gentleness, by the hunger I heard in my own quiet gasp. I melted into her, my fingers reaching for the soft line of her waist, the warmth of her back beneath the damp cotton of her towel. We moved together, slow and uncertain, as if afraid to break the fragile spell that held us. Each touch, each tentative caress, was both a question and an answer. My hands learned the shape of her, the smoothness of her skin, the quickening of her breath beneath my fingers. The world narrowed to the soft sounds of our bodies and the rush of blood in my ears. I felt her hands on me, exploring, comforting, searching for reassurance in every inch of skin. Our bodies met in hesitant waves, exploring, learning, finding courage in the safety of the moment. She pressed her lips to my neck, and I shivered, surprised by the depth of my own longing, how much I wanted to be seen and touched and known. Time slipped and bent around us, the boundaries that once defined us blurred into irrelevance. I forgot about the years that separated us, the rules I had made for myself, the scripts I thought I would always follow. There was only sensation, the heat of her mouth, the brush of her hair, the strong, slow rhythm of our breaths moving in time. I let go of caution, let go of loneliness, let myself sink fully into her, letting the rest of the world fall away. When it was over, the quiet that settled between us was dense and tender, a silence that held everything we had not said. Her head rested against my shoulder, her hand curled over my heart. I felt more alive than I had in years, terrified by the enormity of what we had crossed, yet unwilling to let go of the warmth that now filled the room. The shadows deepened outside the window, the world settling into night, but within these walls, I had stepped past every limit I had ever known, uncertain of what would come next, but certain that I would never forget how it felt to be touched, to be chosen, to be alive. The days that followed moved in a way I had never experienced before, as if the very fabric of time had softened and grown elastic. The boundaries that once separated my life into neat, familiar compartments, landlord and tenant, older and younger, past and future, dissolved in the golden heat of late summer. The house felt transformed, charged with a new energy that pulsed in the air, spilling from room to room. Every surface seemed touched by our secret, every ordinary corner made extraordinary by the memory of skin on skin. Mornings became languid and slow, heavy with a sense of possibility. I woke to the sound of Lynn moving through the hallway, sometimes humming, sometimes silent, her presence a promise even before I opened my eyes. I learned to listen for the rhythm of her day, the shuffle of her slippers on the tile, the faint notes of her favorite songs drifting through her bedroom door, the laughter that bubbled up when she thought she was alone. Our routines merged without effort. I found myself cooking 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, leaving fresh towels in the bathroom, pausing in the doorway just to watch her brush her hair in the mirror. There was an intimacy in these tiny, silent gestures, a growing certainty that we were both creating something delicate and rare. Afternoons blurred into evenings as we floated through the house together, sometimes barely speaking, sometimes laughing so hard the windows rattled in their frames. We prepared meals side by side, moving in a dance of practiced closeness, her hand brushing my hip as she reached for the salt, my fingers lingering at the small of her back. We watched old movies sprawled across the living room floor, limbs tangled, our bodies pressed together under thin summer blankets. The world outside receded to a distant hum. Thunderstorms passed, wind rattled the doors, but none of it could touch us. Inside, the air was thick with the warmth of our bodies and the perfume of her skin mingling with mine. At night, everything sharpened. I learned the map of her body in darkness, the curve of her waist, the small scar on her thigh, the softness of her stomach under my palms. She kissed me with a patience and hunger that broke me open, making me ache for her touch in ways I never thought possible. I lost myself in the taste of her skin, the way her breath stuttered when my lips found the hollow of her throat, the flutter of her pulse beneath my fingertips. We moved together slowly, as if we had all the time in the world, savoring each moment, each new discovery. Some nights, we lay awake for hours after, whispering confessions in the hush between heartbeats, letting the silence stretch and fold around us. There were no rules, no explanations, only the language of glances and laughter and the quiet certainty that we had built a world of our own. The outside world pressed at the edges, messages left unanswered, responsibilities postponed, the inevitable tug of reality, but for a handful of days, we managed to exist beyond all of it. I felt younger than I had in years, unburdened by fear or regret, guided only by desire and the impossible sweetness of being wanted. Even in the quiet moments, her head in my lap as I read, the soft hush of her breathing as she drifted to sleep, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the lines of her arm, I found a peace that felt almost holy. There was a gentleness to our time together, a tenderness that seeped into every part of me. I was learning, slowly, how to let myself be happy. The house that once echoed with loneliness now brimmed with the sound of her laughter, the whisper of her voice, the steady comfort of knowing I was no longer alone. Each day, the boundaries slipped a little further away, and I held tightly to the hope that this feeling, limitless, untethered, impossibly bright, could last just a little longer before the world found its way back in. Something in the air began to shift, at first almost imperceptibly, like a faint change in pressure before a storm. It happened in small ways, the pause in conversation that lingered a moment too long, the half-finished sentences, the absent-minded glances out the window. Lynn started coming home later, her laughter quieter, the easy comfort that once defined our days replaced by a strange, subtle distance. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that the world outside our haven was simply intruding with the weight of its demands, but the truth settled over me in cold, silent waves. I could feel her drifting, even as she smiled, even as she reached for my hand at night. Evenings became more tentative, filled with silences that were no longer full of promise but heavy with what was unsaid. She would retreat to her room for hours, emerging with a distracted look, her phone always in her hand, messages lighting up the screen that I never saw. I found myself searching for her in the small spaces of the house, hoping to catch her gaze and hold it, wishing for the easy warmth that had once lived between us. Instead, I was met with polite smiles, careful distance, and the echo of something slipping away. I tried to reclaim our closeness in quiet gestures, making her favorite tea, leaving little notes, inviting her to join me for a movie or a walk. Sometimes she accepted, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that nothing had changed. But the intimacy we had shared began to feel fragile, as though it might shatter with a single careless word. At night, lying awake in bed, I replayed the memories of us together, searching for the exact moment when the thread between us began to unravel. I remembered the heat of her skin under my hands, the sound of her laughter in the dark, the way our bodies had fit together so naturally. Now there was a hesitation, a restraint, as if she were pulling herself back from the edge of something she no longer wanted to risk. I ached for her touch, for the certainty of her affection, but found only the hollow ache of absence. One evening, As the sky turned the color of ash and the city hummed quietly beyond our walls, Lynn sat beside me on the couch, her posture tense, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked at me with eyes full of sorrow and longing, and though no words were spoken, I understood everything. She was young, restless, the world waiting for her with open arms. Our love had been a shelter, a beautiful, unexpected escape, but it was never meant to last forever. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close as the tears threatened to spill, feeling the shape of our ending press between us. The silence that followed was not comforting or full, but cracked and raw, filled with the sound of two hearts breaking quietly in the dark. That night, we clung to each other with a desperate tenderness, our bodies moving together not out of passion but out of a need to remember, to hold onto the sweetness that was already fading. In the morning, the space beside me was empty. The house, once so full of laughter and light, now echoed with a loneliness sharper than any I had known before. I realized then that sometimes, love is not enough to keep two people together, and that even the most beautiful days can end in silence and loss. In the days after Lynn left, the house seemed to return to its original size, but something vital had shifted forever. The silence was no longer a gentle companion but a sharp echo in every room, magnified by the memory of her laughter and the warmth that lingered where she used to sit. Mornings arrived gray and unhurried. I moved quietly through the routines that once felt like anchors, now hollow and mechanical. The kitchen felt colder, the sun less eager to press through the windows, and the air hung heavy with things unsaid. I still found traces of her everywhere, a forgotten cup behind the sink, a stray hair on the pillow, the faint scent of her lotion clinging to the hallway when I opened my door. Each small discovery was a bittersweet ache, a reminder that she had been real, that we had existed together in this space, if only for a fleeting while. I tried to fill the emptiness with distractions, but nothing seemed to fit. I spent long afternoons walking through familiar neighborhoods, letting my feet carry me past front yards blooming with late summer flowers, past children's bikes lying in the grass and neighbors waving absently as I passed. The world seemed unchanged, but inside me everything had been rearranged, every part of me still humming with the memory of her touch, her voice, the comfort of her presence pressed up close in the dark. Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed and reach for her out of habit, only to find the vast stretch of sheets cool and undisturbed beside me. I would close my eyes and try to hold on to the feeling of her arms wrapped around me, her breath soft against my skin, the shape of her body curved into mine. Memory became its own kind of company, a bittersweet shadow that followed me from dusk until dawn. I mourned what we lost and what would never be, birthdays we would not share, secrets we would not confess, all the quiet joys of ordinary life that now felt out of reach. But beneath the ache was gratitude, deep and humbling. I knew I had been changed by loving her, that the loneliness I had lived with for so many years had been cracked open and filled, if only for a season. She had reminded me of the way it felt to be seen, to be wanted, to belong wholly to a moment. Even in her absence, I carried that gift with me, a spark in the quiet, a promise that the heart can wake again after years of sleep. Over time, the edges of loss softened. The house grew quieter, yes, but also more peaceful, as if the walls themselves understood that nothing was truly gone, that everything we had shared had left its mark, indelible and gentle. I learned to move through my days with a little more patience, a little more tenderness for myself. I let the memories come and go like weather, sometimes sharp and sudden, sometimes only a faint warmth curling through my chest. I understood, finally, that love does not need to last forever to change you. Some connections are brief and blazing, and their beauty is in their impermanence. I could not hold on to her, but I could carry forward what she left in me, the capacity to risk, to open, to hope again. And with that, even in solitude, I found a kind of quiet happiness, a life that was once again my own, but forever marked by the days when I was truly, fearlessly alive.